to the third in our series of interviews with healthcare professionals who serve those working in the performing arts. Today I have with me David Peirce, who is a physiotherapist. Welcome, David.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks. So, David, great to have you here. I'd like to begin by asking you what drew your interest into working in performing arts medicine?
It was actually a chance meeting in Mount Isa with a lady who is now my wife. So I was working in Mount Isa, young physio, no other goal in life but to be the physio for the Australian Rugby Union team in my professional career. And working up there, I met a contemporary dancer from Dance North, Lisa Wilson, who I moved to Townsville not long after meeting Lisa, and I started working with Dance North in Townsville. So there was clearly a vast difference between treating rugby players and contemporary dancers. And of course, I knew nothing about contemporary dance, didn't know what contemporary dance was. But I liked it. I liked the girl. So I stayed involved, and I ended up working with quite a few dancers in Townsville. And then Lisa and I travelled to England, and I actually got my dream job in a professional rugby club in the UK. But in that time, I also kept treating a few dancers here and there. Coming back to Brisbane in 2000, there was a need for looking after dancers. There was only a couple of physios in Brisbane who had any interest in it. Lisa got a job with Expressions Dance Company, a contemporary company here in Brisbane. I started working with them. That led me to working with Queensland Ballet. So within a few years, I'd gone from professional full-time rugby union to the guest physio for the Queensland Ballet Company, which was extraordinary. And I had a crash course in dance terminology, in dance, ethos, psychology of dance, and these completely different worlds in many ways. But what, of course, links them together is they're all about physical performance. And I think that's a lot of thing that performing artists forget, is that, yes, it's artistic, it's expressive, it's emotive, but it's all physical. And the strains on the body, on the brain are different, but they're the things that cause injuries and of short or long term nature in the performing arts. So my work with the ballet led to treating more dancers, and that led to going to the International Dance Medicine Conference, which was held in Canberra in 2007, I think. And there was a lady who we all know called Bronwyn Ackerman, who was launching ASPAH at the IADMS conference. And I chatted to Bronwyn, and of course she was working with musicians. And I said, oh, it's fascinating. I would never have thought that musicians needed physio. And we had a cup of coffee, and now, years later, I'm now the consultant physio for the Queensland Symphony Orchestra. About 20% of my business load is with musicians, both professional and amateur and up and coming. I have two other physios who work predominantly with dancers. We've worked in musical theatre. We've worked with Queensland Theatre and other acting companies. So that chance meeting in Mount Isa has led to a whole new world being opened up, and a far cry from rugby union. So that's the story.
Given that move to serve initially dancers and then now also musicians, what particular ailments do you find that you've been treating, perhaps focusing on musicians? And are there particular things that are particularly challenging to treat in the well-being of musicians?
The predominant difference with musicians playing related musculoskeletal disorders, PRMDs, we call it the researchers call it, is that it's low to moderate load, but incredibly high repetition.
Mm-hmm.
And the injuries tend to creep up on the musicians rather than being, acute injuries. We don't see many sprained ankles in the musicians, or dislocated shoulders, or torn muscles. They're longer term, what used to be described as overuse injuries. But we don't use that terminology anymore, of course, because it's not just doing too much that causes the problems. There's a whole raft of risk factors that go into creating an injury or a pain, I guess. 90% of the musicians' injuries that I see are upper limb, so neck, shoulder, and arm. Some lower back, and naturally not many lower limb injuries from playing related circumstances, which is different from dance, where the predominant injury areas are the hip and the ankle, particularly in the female dancers. So there's different areas of the body and different loads on the body. Even in dance, they do have, longer term overuse type injuries, or lower to mediate load, high repetition, but they also have the explosive high load, short repetition injuries, like, fractures and sprains and so forth. So in the musician, you're just seeing a different type of injury that is generally taking a longer time to develop. And what the research around the world, and I thank all those researchers out there who continue to do it, what the research is telling us is there's a multiple of risk factors involved. And it's not just how you address the instrument and how much you play, but there's a raft of contributing factors that can all play a little bit or a lot of a part in each musician's particular ailment.
Can you particularly name perhaps some of those risk factors that contribute to their coming to need to see you? And I'd also be interested to know if there are particular signs that musicians should be paying attention that might cause them to see you sooner. So perhaps about the risks, and then that question of when should they be thinking of seeing a physiotherapist?
I actually had a Skype interview with a researcher in Liverpool 2 days ago, who is a young French lady who's presenting at PAMA this year in Los Angeles on this exact topic. And we went through 10, 12 minutes of slides of all the risk factors that are involved. So I'll shorten it down to a couple, but I actually think in my experience, and I'm speaking from my experience rather than what the research tells us, primarily because the research is still relatively thin on the risk factors and how they exactly relate to playing related disorders. There's been a lot more done. Of course, Bronwyn's sound practice project, which was an enormous project, and the work of key people in America and the UK. But I think that the biggest risk factor still for musicians is that they don't see themselves as physical performers, and they don't comprehend that their body's being put under these strains over long periods of time until it suddenly hurts. That part of starting off playing in footy is that you'll do a warm up and the coach will say, you guys have got to get fit. Or, for netball, there's a cross training that goes with it, and you don't just play netball. You don't just play footy, but musicians generally just play.
Right.
And they're taught from a young age to play. They're not taught to get fit for playing. They're not taught to warm up before they play. They're not taught any sort of recovery protocols after they play. And although there's not a lot of research that says those things are important to musicians specifically, I think it's very easy to extrapolate from the sporting research and the physical performance worlds, like other worlds like dance, where cross-training, warm-up, recovery, and being fit to play very well accepted. But in the musician's world still, not a lot of musicians have a cross-training fitness program. More and more are happening as we try and educate the musicians world. And I have noticed in the last couple of years, I've actually seen more of the artists from the Queensland Symphony Orchestra who have little niggles, or they're seeing me about things related to getting fit rather than related to playing, which is great. And they even say to me, is it okay if I see you about this, running injury? And I'm like, sure, if you're trying to get fit, then let's help you get fit. Because we're pretty confident that the fitter you are, and generally the stronger you are, the less likely you are to be injured. So your body has the capacity to handle that low to moderate load, high repetition. You've got the cardiovascular endurance, you've got the muscular endurance, you've got the postural endurance, and also just accepting the fact that it is a physical performance art form. There's the psychology around that changes as well, and the acceptance that it is taxing on the body, and you have to look after your body and your mind. You can't just play and play and play and play and play and expect everything to be okay.
Are there, that's great, that idea of really taking the whole person into account in terms of like their fitness, both physical, but also the mindsets they bring to that. Are there any particular traps in mindset? Like you've mentioned already, the fact that they tend to not consider musical performance a physical activity. Are there any other mindset traps or things that you'd like to have musicians think more about as they look after their craft?
Musicians are really good at repetition, and to be a professional musician certainly takes, or to be a professional anything, any career takes an amount of dedication and rehearsal, but musicians are very good at practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing, and then getting it right, and then practicing it more, and then not being satisfied that they've got it right, so practicing it more again. And dancers are very much the same. And I don't think I've come across a lot of musicians, until we try and educate them or talk to them about it, that they're actually looking at how much they're doing and actually keeping a record of how much they're doing. If you look at if we look at what sport does, they have set periods of training, and they go, this is how long we're going to train for today. This is what the sports scientists have told us. This is what the nutritionists has told us. We need this amount of energy to train for this period of time. They've got GPS trackers on them that tell them how far they've run, and they'll stop them training. In Aussie rules in Australia, they'll stop people training if they've perceived that they've done too much before they get tired, before they get injured.
Right.
So, keeping a training diary and actually recording how much you've done, and looking and going, wow, I actually did 27 hours of playing my musical instrument last week. Is that healthy?
Yeah.
Over a long period of time. And that's one thing it's not part of generally, I don't think, is part of the musicians, training, to look at how much they're doing. It's just practice until you get it right. And of course, the same thing happens in choreography and dance, or in any field. There's a point where you've practiced too much and you're never going to get it right. So you've got to stop, let your body and mind recover, come back and do it fresh. And I think a lot of musicians aren't good at that, and particularly around those high stress times like auditions or coming into the concert series. If there's a place coming up in an orchestra or a band, and you want to practice for that audition, and it's not uncommon for the musicians to go into audition exhausted, which really doesn't make any sense in the potential to play at your best.
Actually, that would be a great final question I'd like to ask you, because that really kind of gives us a sense of a forward momentum of things that musicians could do better. Would there be particular tips around keeping a diary, or what kind of preparation or mindset, particularly as you say for auditions where you don't want to be exhausted, you actually want to have that optimal performance, I would imagine. Is there any kind of final tips you'd like to offer musicians?
The main thing going back to what I originally said, the main thing I'm trying to achieve with all the musicians that I'm treating is to get them generally fitter and physically stronger, more aware of their body positioning. And I generally, in my position, I don't cross the line into technique pedagogy and showing them how to hold the violin or how they should be changing things. I always talk with the teachers on that, because that's not my field of excellence. But certainly there are addressing the instrument, how you're holding it, and can make an enormous difference. But generally the things that we can influence most easily are your general fitness, your general strength, and that will allow you to play for longer and to not suffer from the what is, people say, oh, you're doing too much. You're doing too much for your current capacity. That's how you get injured. One of the ways you get injured. So if you increase your capacity, you can do more, but you can't increase your capacity by playing more. You've got to cross train, take out some playing hours and replace that with some fitness hours. Make sure you're eating well and preparing your body with energy for the playing period that you're about to do. And there's one area that I'm really interested in personally, and I'm hoping to do a pilot study with the orchestra this year, is what do musicians do after they play. And it's really easy with violinists, because I always say to them, what's the first thing you do when you finish with your instrument? And they go, oh, I undo the bow and I take the tension out of it and put it away. And I go, so what do you do with your body? And they look at me blankly and go, well, nothing, I just stop. And there are recovery techniques, whether it be stretching or relaxation, mindful relaxation, whatever it is, that are commonly used in sport and research evidence in sport that haven't crossed over into the musician's world. And that's an area I'd really like to explore. And anecdotally, the musicians that I do introduce that with do find a difference. So doing some simple stretches after they've played to help the muscles potentially recover from the intense bursts of exercise that they've just done, making sure they eat, making sure they hydrate, and making sure that they're sleeping enough. And we all know from sport that sleep is a huge area of performance management. And it's very hard in the arts. I was talking to the local conservatorium students, musical theatre students, earlier this week. And one of the things we talked about was how hard it is to get enough sleep when you're performing until 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night, and your body cycles change. You're in artificial light, and it will always be a problem in the performing arts. But in sport, they plan the next 2 days after they have that performance about how they're going to recover and how they sleep and when they sleep. But you're doing back-to-back shows, and then you've got to get up and practice, and you've got to teach because you've got to earn extra money. It is very difficult to put all those factors together. So, but just being aware of those, and I said, keeping a diary of how much you slept, what you ate, how long you practiced for, what you did before and afterwards, it can really show up that you're not doing enough, and you're doing enough around your performance, and that you're just trying to do more performing. And it's becoming pretty evident that that is not a good recipe for avoiding or minimizing the chance of playing related pain and injury.
Well, thanks, David. That's a terrific set of tips for our audience to take action on.
Pleasure.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for
My pleasure, Mark. Great to be of use. Cheers.
Yeah. So thanks to all of you for tuning in to watch this interview episode that's been prepared by the Australian Society for Performing Arts Healthcare, that's ASPAH. And you can make contact with ASPAH through the links associated with this video. I invite you to become a member of ASPAH. My name's Dr. Mark Seaton, and this Interview webinar is hosted with the support of Sense Connection. Bye for now.